Hey there, are you grieving the potential loss of a loved one or feeling overwhelmed with the loss of someone you care about? If so, you're in the right place. Lisa Hartung here, and this podcast is designed to guide you through topics surrounding death and dying. We'll dive into multifaceted aspects of grief, offering you a blend of personal stories, expert insights, and practical advice for your grief journey. May this be a safe space for you to learn, listen, and ask questions about your own life and loved ones. So grab your favorite beverage and let's dive in.
Thank you so much. Today's guest, we have Jean Jennings. She in Central Maine. She is a famous hospice nurse, and I'm so delighted to have Jean with us today. So without further ado, Jean, welcome to the podcast. I've been so excited to interview you. We met a few years ago when you were my mom's hospice nurse, and you really helped our family out considerably. It's such a tough time on someone's journey. And I know that my mom was like, Jean's my little angel. And you were so helpful for all of our family members. So thank you for sitting down with me today to talk about yourself, your life, your profession, and what brought you back to the practice. And congratulations. I do know that you recently retired, so enjoy retirement. But let's dive in, Jean. Maybe you could introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about your story. You do have a very unique story that I would love for our listeners to hear because it's one of hope and it's one of perseverance. And so, Jean, I'll let you take it from here.
Lisa, thank you. I'll start out with my nursing. I was new grad and in ICU. There you go. Life and death right there.
Yeah.
Another thing, I am a people person. I love people. Ask about wait staffing for 8 years before that, you get to, some of the people. So ICU, then down into the Augusta area to be closer to family after my boyfriend at the time and husband to be graduated. We wanted to move down closer to family. Started right out in pediatrics. Bam. The kids that we had there sometimes died there. So you get to know the family long term very, very well. So right there is preliminary hospice care. Then, 4 years, I guess, in anesthesia recovery room. So there, 99% boredom and 1% sheer terror. However, what I missed getting to know the people very well and the families. You didn't get to see them in the OR. But the scavenger system was not good for someone in my position who got pregnant. So I who asked me to get over here to community health right away. It was called Kennebec Valley Regional Health at that time, which switched to Health Reach and then later became enfolded in Maine General's home care and hospice. And started out again in pediatrics. Unfortunately, I was already specialized. And it's very hard to get pediatric nurses on the road and hard to get any kind of hospice training for children. I did have a lot of Maine children, cancer children, kids along the way in the community. In this community, I guess I had all of them for a number of years, 10 years. I will say that you really, who knows the kids better but the parents?
Mm-hmm.
I learned really early on to listen to the parents. They know what's going on, and the kids were braver. I still don't know if it's because they're children and they're more accepting. They were frightened once in a while for their parents. They weren't scared for themselves. However, these children, most of the time, were brought down to the hospital for end of life. There were only a few families that I could care for at home in total. And so rewarding. And maybe the dozen that I had, they were older children. And they could make the decision to say, Mom and Dad, no, I don't want to be in a hospital. I want to be here at home. So incredibly intense. However, now here's the personal part, Lisa. I developed an ovarian germ cell cancer, very rare. 5 ladies in the country had it at the same time. It's different than regular ovarian cancer. And had, surgeries and chemotherapy. I got back to work maybe 5 months later. I had thought about this for a while. My daughter was 8. I had to survive. I had some incredible stories I'll tell you after the podcast. One story in particular remind me of when I was very cold and suddenly got very warm and was shown that I was going to be okay. But that's a different story. So I went back to work. I'd been thinking about it. And I walked right across the hall into the hospice room and I said, "Hi, I'm leaving pediatrics and community health. I'm coming over to here, hospice. And I have 4 patients that are coming with me." So the 4 patients that I had were adults at that time. They all had terminal prognoses. They weren't imminent, but that's what hospice is about. And I know that you're going to ask me this at some point, who qualifies for hospice? I walked right into the hospice door and said, "Here I am." And there I was for the next 28 years.
Oh my gosh.
So there's a couple of things that jump off at that. What I learned during the pediatric part of hospice was you have to listen. You really have to hear. The first few sentences in every visit will tell you what's going on, what needs to be addressed. You don't have to have an agenda, because either the patient or the family is going to tell you. And if you're listening, you'll know exactly what you're zooming in on that for that visit. That's healing. It doesn't have to be physical. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's family dynamics. Sometimes it's mental and where am I, So if you just listen very carefully, they will tell you what they need from you. Easy peasy.
Do you find that with not only with pediatrics, but with adults as well? Or is it more nuanced with adults?
When pediatrics, you listen to the parents because
they know the kid best.
And that's what I would always say to the doctors. Why? Just listen to the parents. They'll tell you what's going on. They'll tell you what's different. And yes, and I'll be here and I'll do the blood counts and we'll get an idea. But if you listen to the parents, then you know what's going on. If in an adult, that's what I was saying, is when you enter the home, either the family, the spouse, the patient literally will tell you the purpose of your visit within 2 or 3 minutes.
Wow. It's just intrinsic.
Even if they say, "Oh, everything's fine this week," or nothing's changed since, Tuesday, and this is Friday. If you listen, so it's not just going in there doing blood pressures and that's another thing. I hear this all the time. I just read this in a magazine yesterday. One of the dietitians was talking regional. This is a dietitian for all of New England. And we don't just go into the pressures. Well, that is one thing that you don't say to people. You're not taking a blood pressure. Kids are going to freak out. What is she taking from me? No, I'm just going to check your blood pressure. It's all in words. You just have to become a little bit more cognizant about what you're using for words. I'm just going to check. And that comes, I think, with a lot of practice. Just practice with being with people, So if you just listen to them, within minutes, they'll tell you what needs to be addressed that visit, that very visit.
You had this experience with pediatrics, and then you had your own cancer journey. And at one point in your cancer journey, you thought that you were on the terminal path as well, and had an event that turned
Yes. Lisa, hospice is incredibly spiritual work. I almost think it's better. Staffers walk this line of having to know their own spiritual self without preaching. There is no preaching. And I learned that at a young age too. Holding a finger up as a nurse and saying, "No, you must not eat that," is sort of like preaching. People need to have choices.
Yes.
We educate all the time. Educate. In hospice, particularly, it is a specialty that you are not just looking at the physical person.
Like the whole.
You're very much mental, emotionally, and spiritually. And not just the person. It is the family. It's always a family unit. It's never, ever just geared to one person. It can't be. We don't thrive. We don't live in this world alone.
Yeah. I mean, they say it takes a village, and it's so true. And I'm sure that you find that quite a bit at end of life.
Yes, it's better to have 4 people take care of one than one-on-one. That it's incredibly tiring. It can be done, but it's very wearing. So yes, I did share. So I was spiritually very comfortable with that part of taking care of people. And I did have an episode. A couple things happened when I got my terminal diagnosis. Yeah, this was stage 4, and it's very terminal. Luckily, because they had done so much research on testicular cancer, which is pre-sperm. I had pre-egg. A germ cell is dependent upon which hormone you're carrying. It doesn't happen to women very often. We have much fewer germ cells than males do, but the treatment for the males was very cut and dried. It was 98% if the chemotherapy didn't kill you. It was rugged, very rugged. So one thing that happened that I did not know of myself, for the first 5 weeks after I was diagnosed, I couldn't be alone. I would have never, ever guessed that of myself. I found myself needing somebody in the house with me all the time. So, of course, my mother, my sister, my girlfriends, Henry, took turns basically being with me for 5 weeks, Lisa. Finally, on one night, Henry really needed to go to the grocery store, and he brought Kate, who was 8. I said, please, go, I'll be fine. And I was laying in bed, sort of, with a magazine, reading the same paragraph over and over and over. You can't concentrate when you have this kind of thing going on. The dog was on one side of me. The 2 cats were on the other sides of me. All of a sudden, their ears and heads and eyes popped up and started looking at me over my left shoulder in the corner of the room. And then slowly their ears, everything, all these faces pointed to the other up shoulder in the corner of the room. I got ice cold. My hair stood up all over my body. I said, oh my God, there's something in this room. And then I felt that once again, all their faces swung around to look up into another corner of the room. So just icy cold, hardly breathing, going, what is happening? It started at the top of my head. My hair relaxed, my scalp. I felt this incredible warmth slowly wash down over my head, and then, shoulders, chest area, throughout my body. I became incredibly warm. All the animals put their heads down at that point, and I was just like, what happened? And I just heard in my head, I think, you're going to be okay. That was a turning point in my care. I knew at that point that I was going to be here for my 8-year-old kid. That was my raison d'etre. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What a beautiful, experience to be able to have that spiritual connection and just have that knowing.
Some of my coworkers were not as clear spiritually. They just didn't have that support. I think that being open to it really helped my care of people, especially when you have experiences like that and you're willing to accept them, because I was fine after. However, I did really need I needed a sign and was given it. And I'm going to add one more thing. I didn't share that probably with half a dozen people, over the years until I shared it with you. However, my mother, when she had stage 4 cancer, asked me to tell her that story again 3 times in her last month of life. She loved that story also. So I shared it with her.
Yeah, I think it's one of hope. And when you receive a prognosis or a terminal diagnosis, it can be completely life-changing. And so by hearing those success stories and those really out-of-body experiences, it's so heartwarming and miraculous, right? They say miracles happen every day. And my goodness.
Yes, there are miracles. I will say there's a lot more miracles on the pediatric side of a terminal diagnosis. We can't explain why, but sometimes there is spontaneous remissions and cures, and we do not know why. Yes, much more than adults. So there's so much more mystery to unravel. Nursing is definitely science-based. Medicine, all of medicine is absolutely science-based, but there is also, in my experience, pediatrics and in hospice mostly, there's definitely an art side to it. And so the spiritual part that I can offer is part of that art. It's not scientifically proven. However, if you get a clue on people, if you understand, some of the family dynamics and some of the personalities, you can give them hope without telling them they're going to be cured, because we are mortal. Everyone knows that, even though our society doesn't like to to think about that part of life. We are mortal and we do know that we're going to die. I really think that hospice is a wonderful addition, a wonderful support for the family and patient for that type of, if you have this terminal disease, so you're qualified basically for hospice right there. You want a really good support team, then I'll, just say to you, doc, I want hospice. Most people, especially, well, I'm not going to say especially Mainers, there's more and more people that would prefer to be at home. Sometimes we have a few personalities that say, no, I don't want to burden, I don't want to burden the family. I want to go to the hospital. And that's, or a facility. That's usually fine. Sometimes they're talked out of it by family and sometimes not, and that's okay. We all need choices. We definitely, and type A personalities need even more choices because they want to do it themselves, which is fine. We know, the team doesn't mean we're ancillary. We are there sometimes just to support the family. Sometimes the patient does not need us, quite frankly, really.
And that's something that people hear the word hospice and they automatically kind of cringe or the lay people, or if someone does get a terminal diagnosis. And, I've even been talking to friends that say, have you thought about hospice? And everyone goes, oh no, I don't want to do that. And I found that it was so helpful, as you said, right? It's the whole family, the whole being of not only the patient, but the whole community. And how can you uplift this individual and their team? There are so many specialists within the hospice realm as well. So maybe for listeners who might be considering hospice, maybe you could share about the support that goes far and wide beyond just one person coming in to check on the patient.
I'm going to back up a little bit. I think some of people's concerns are financial. So right now, before we get medical reform, which I've been arguing about since I became a young RN in 1982, we're not getting the reform right away. However, what we do have is we have Medicare, and to a part in Maine, we have Maine Care. Medicare, I think of as a tree. The top two branches, A and B, they'll pay for the hospital and they'll pay for some expensive procedures. Branches down here, C, D, more procedures, tests, and some prescriptions, which, by the way, that's really being reformed. They're going to add on 10 new prescriptions this year and 15 next year. So when you use your hospice benefits, it's not like you're totally giving up your Medicare. What you're getting is a specialized, you have to have a terminal diagnosis and must have Medicare. But once you get that diagnosis, Medicare hospice is the way to go, because almost all of community health is paid for. Most of your tests, most of the doctor specific is paid for. So what you get for your benefit is a team of RNs, of course, social workers, home health aides that can go in and do personal care in the home. We have wonderful, incredible chaplains. We have a whole volunteers are free, that can actually drive people around, do errands, go pick up, take you out. Chaplains are incredibly gifted. To have a whole program, to have a whole functioning program. We have at one time had music therapists, art therapists, pet therapists. Well, these are volunteers who are paid small, amounts, and they will also do it privately, if people want to pay them. So there's a whole variety of services that can be offered. But we had some clients, Penobscot, Maine has a lot of, Indian indigenous people, and sometimes they want drumming, which is really fun. Or sometimes we get asked to do services, and those services can take on a huge variety of cultural shades. So you're open to all of those. So the hospice team, the whole team, is incredibly rich. It can touch on many aspects of many lives. And, Mainers are gifted. We have a lot of people that are very crafty or artisans. And sometimes the nurses can help out with that. And sometimes we have to call in a special volunteer for that kind of thing.
One thing that I love about hospice is it is tailored to each individual, right?
Yes.
And what their needs are and what they would be open to.
She was a gardener, and we've had volunteers and sometimes volunteers that will go out and garden with people or teach them. There can be some really meaningful interactions around this time. Yeah.
I remember at the end of my mom's life, it was hard to get in and out of the house. but she would go every morning and weed in the garden because that was so grounding for her. It was such a beautiful time. So yeah, I think that if someone is considering, do I enroll in hospice or not, at least for me, it was the biggest change was, we spend our whole lives with the medical system trying to save our lives or elongate our lives in some way. And the biggest change was that at hospice, or when we enrolled mom in hospice, it was, okay, we understand that this is the final chapter of her life. Some people have graduated from hospice and come out of it, but most often, this is the final chapter. And so let's make everyone comfortable and really celebrate. And so maybe you have a different perspective on that, but that was the biggest change for me as a caregiver, to be like, oh, this is so interesting that it's not, okay, we're going to elongate the life, but we're going to make sure the quality of life is there as long as we can have it.
Absolutely. So thinking outside of the box is essential. We've had people that have gotten, I just want to go sit on the ocean for an afternoon. Well, then you have to try to plan when and what that can happen, because it is about enjoying things. It's absolutely, people say they have a bucket list. Well, guess what? We should all have a bucket list.
Yes.
As many things as we can. Your mom got out, I'm thinking, and did some really fun things.
She did.
However, is a piece, just when we get a plan in place, a new symptom can come up, or mobility can be decreased, or we're just not thinking or feeling well enough. Yeah. So we have to think of, the plan has to change immediately, and we have to either adapt it or we have to think of something, some other form of pleasure. You have to have joy. I remember my oncologist that was integral in saving me the first time would come in and he'd say, "What are we doing today?" "Oh, we're playing cribbage." And he came in every day with, "What are we doing today?" And that changed my attitude. It was like, oh my gosh, I feel so sick too. He could poke his head through the door and not say a word, just look at me, and I would look at him, and he could leave. I felt an instant change in my body. My stomach would settle down. I wouldn't feel nauseous for a while. And I realized it was a release in endorphins, I'm sure, just seeing his face and knowing that I trusted him, and he really did care about me. He loved me. I loved him. I went on to work with him. I had already been working with him for years, but I went on to work with him until he retired. And if I see his face, that feeling will come over me. And I've had people, when they learn to trust you, say the same thing. All I have to do is see your face and I feel better. And boy, do I know that feeling. So I believe it. Yeah. The feeling of trust and love, it's not scientific. It's the art.
Yeah, but I think that's what's so special about hospice is it's not just the scientific, it is the spiritual or the creative, and it is tailored to the individual. And so, how often it's hard, you go to the doctor and you've got 10 minutes to say what you need. And usually they'll give you a prescription or try to help you with whatever ailment you have. Whereas at hospice, it's like, let's sit down and chat. Let's have a conversation. So much more warm and welcoming from my perspective of what we experienced with you, Jean. And, it's just such a gift. I think that you don't enter hospice as a profession unless you have a gift, right? Because it's such a heart-centered profession. So maybe you could share with us how, it's such a beautiful time in someone's life, right? Because you're really getting the life review. They're sharing things with you. We're trusting, establishing that trust. And then you get close with the family and the patient or the individual passes away. And how, as a hospice professional, was it for you when you would lose someone that you've, established a relationship for months in some cases?
I think my personal philosophy is I know and believe that we are mortal. I haven't met anyone yet. I'd love to. That's immortal. I think that would be soul wearing. I really do. Intuitively, we know that we're going to die. And yes, at the end of life, there is a lot. We become a lot more reflective. We do a lot of life review. And so walking in on that, you can, if you're listening, you can pick up things, because as human beings, we are not that different. We might have lived a very different life, but at end of life, we get there, and we're reviewing some of the same things. I was told, I think in nursing school, not to get too close. I don't think that can happen. As a professional, there are boundary issues. You can't be, there's rules. You can't drive a patient around. We don't have insurance for that. So there are, boundaries. However, as far as talking and supporting someone, I am definitely not a psychologist. However, the issues that come up at end of life are, can I forgive myself? Can I forgive others? It's incredibly, and I am not good with words. I have had some volunteer or bereavement counselors who support the hospice staff, who support the RNs, that are totally gifted in words. What I do pick up and what I honor is that this is sacred work. This is truly sacred work. And anyone that is touched by this, and at some point in our lives, we're going to be touched with our own death, if not a loved one's death. You just have to be respectful. You just need to respect all. Put your personal feelings on hold. I think maybe it's not feelings. It's definitely personal preferences and personal prejudices. No. Those do not enter here. They can't.
So how was it for you going, 28 years, and that's in the adult hospice, right? Because you were in the pediatric before that.
14 years.
What motivates?
I think I gave the secret away right at the beginning. I love people.
Yeah.
I love, and that makes it very interesting. Extremely interesting to me. Of course, there's little, I'm trying to think of, I was just thinking, and I spoke about personal preferences and prejudices, and I remember so many times us Mainers, dry senses of humor, trying to get me going. They'd come at me with a twinkle in their eye and trying to get me going, like on politics. Okay.
Oh gosh.
Over the years. And I just sort of smile and I'd put them off. Well, if it came up again, which it usually did, because they would have, like I said, the twinkle in their eyes. They were just trying to learn me, I think. And I finally would say to them, we're not talking about that right now. We're not talking about that right now. We're talking about, your life. Another thing about the population that I served is all of us Mainers seem to be very attuned to nature. Of course, all parts of nature. We did a lot of our visits outside. When it was inclement, of course, you'd do it inside. So they were always very honorable. On call. On call was a big part of our nursing lives for a while, out in the snow and the sleet. And even in the midst of their crisis, a lot of people were very aware of what was going on outside and said, come down when you're plowed. Come down when you're plowed. Or don't come today. Come tomorrow or the next day. We're fine. Or sometimes if someone was particularly, I know that we haven't really talked about symptom management, but sometimes it's physical pain, and we can usually get that handled within a visit or two. A day or an hour. This kind of stuff can't go on. That physically hurts my stomach when I see someone suffering. I learned that a long time ago, which could have contributed to my cancer. I internalize things, and some of my nursing friends have said that before. So if we just sort of step outside with these folks, it's instant calming. So I know at that point it's not always somatic, it's not always body pain. It can be mental pain. So if we just take a little break, or even just look outside and watch the cardinal. People are always telling me what's going on outside the house. Look, there's a cardinal. Those parts can enhance a visit.
Yes.
Immeasurably. It's like reading poetry or listening to really nice music that they like. Take whatever they like and just use it.
Yeah. And such a great part about that you can share in their enjoyment, right? And then you get a little bit of that yourself.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Well put. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that hospice, again, is all about relationships as well. Sometimes I think everyone thinks about and deals with grief and death and dying differently. And I would love to hear how you kind of navigated the strong emotions that came up with not only the individual that you were working alongside, but also the family members. And how do you provide support to those individuals, because it's a really emotional time.
Yes. Sometimes with a big family, even sometimes smaller families, we have definite opinions as family members how we want mom or dad or whoever is currently ill. Usually mom or dad, and sometimes not. Sometimes it's sibling. We can have very strong opinions. What I've learned to do is if there's a lot of disagreement, that really is not helpful. If it's starting to distress the patient, who is the core, even though it's a family unit, you have to address everyone. We might sit down and have a family meeting. And those have been incredibly productive. And those can get incredibly heated as far as you have to be careful. I think that when we're having a family meeting, I make sure that everyone that is there knows the importance of the meeting. I let them know beforehand. Mom and dad have asked for a family meeting, or I'm asking for a family meeting. I need everybody there at a certain time. When can you get out of work? When can you be there? So they know that this is not a regular visit. This is a powwow. This is deal with some heavy issues here. We need to get on whoever's page. We need to listen to each other. Those family meetings can be incredibly tough and incredibly powerful. And sometimes it will require the social worker and the RN to be there. So there's no triangulation. Everybody hears. We have 2 or 3 people hearing the same thing and coming to the same conclusion. And then you have that as a tool to go back on and say, now, Jeff, when we were at this meeting 2 weeks ago, you agreed that this was going to, and I know you're still processing this and still have feelings. However, did you not hear what Dad said he wanted? So we have to honor that now. We all agreed to honor that. So that right there, that's a huge tool. It does take time. That takes a lot of time to set up and do. However, it usually clears the air and everyone is heard. Oh, I want Mom to have acupuncture. Well, that's wonderful. Have acupuncture. However, who's going to drive her there? Are you going to take responsibility for if Mom wants to try acupuncture? We need to have someone that can get her. Those kind of things can be ironed out in a family meeting very quickly. And thus, because everybody's been addressed, everybody's been able to have their say, we've worked towards different goals. After that, it's up to the individual. When we come out of a meeting like that, everybody's usually together.
You're on the same page, and how important that is, right? Especially when you have kids thinking that their parents need to do something because they're thinking that's what they would do if they were in the situation, but they're not the ones in the situation, right? Is that something that you learned over time working with the families? Like, okay, this is a tool that I'm definitely going to keep in my toolbox.
And I was in a family meeting a week after I started hospice with a social worker that did not know me because I was new. And he was very sweet because after we got out of the meeting, he said, wow, I could see how you helped that family, those people. And I had known and worked with one of the daughters. And that was a really, really good feeling to get everybody on the same page. If you listen, Lisa, this is what you can get where the dynamics or the challenge lies within 3 minutes, because somebody will be sitting there jumping up and down their seat. I have to say something. So, body language and listening to them, then you can sort of mediate the meeting, and very helpful.
And I think that's such a special part about working with hospice, right? Is the ombudsman, the third party that comes in and helps the family have those difficult conversations that they might not be prepared for on their own.
Exactly. Oh, I know what has come up. I know now. I remember what I was going to talk about. The MAID program instituted 6 years ago. I get medical assistance in dying.
A death with dignity?
Dignity, yeah, but it's actually entitled the Medical Assistance in Dying Act.
Okay.
We were asked to help write that, help create the law, oh gosh, at least 10, 15 years ago. It was based on Colorado because they were the ones that started initially in the United States. And I think Maine was the second state to institute it. So death with dignity is when you get a terminal diagnosis. You go to your doctor and say, I want to have this choice. I want to be able to end my own life before the disease makes me incapacitated and I might suffer. Or I had to do complete turnaround in my nursing career of no, allow natural death. No. And after I started thinking about that, there are people that do need that control. Absolutely. They need choices. And what was I always about? I've always been about choices. Why was I even doubting? So that MAID program has come up in the last 3 or 4 years in some cases. It's not common. I think there's only 90 to 100 people in the last 5 years in the state who's to do that. And some of them, actually, a much greater number will get the medicines in the home and be educated. It's a 21-day process, 1 to 3 doctor's visits, 2 social worker visits. I think there's an RN visit and some, while hospice often is ongoing. However, during the end, when they would actually self-ingest the medicine, most legal teams like Maine Generals won't allow staff on the premises. So these folks are out there alone and unsupported, except for one tiny group of volunteers. There are 11 volunteers in the state right now. One of them happens to be my RN friend that just retired a year ago. And 6 months after she retired, she found time to join this volunteer program. And she's saying, Jean, you need to do this. So I need to do this, Lisa. Having the choice. Yeah, and I know that you've mentioned that you've had some personal losses. I am looking right now at a loss of probably in the next 2 months of a very dear friend. And I don't know if I'm going to be a volunteer by then. She has already said she wants to participate in the MAID program, which I think is definitely her choice. It's the right choice. I might be able to help, or I might, I've already asked the volunteer friend if she could participate and be on the premises when hospice can't be. So, and she said yes. So, so that's the next stage of my career.
Oh, wow. Such heart-centered work. That's to be present when someone is going through that final stage.
I have been so blessed. People would say, how can you do this work? As you can imagine. And I would just, I smile. I know that I smile because I can't imagine doing anything else. It is then a blessing. It's emotionally can be very wearing sometimes. You can get really fatigued. However, there is this part of me that knows everything will be okay in the end for that person. I truly believe that. Yeah. They will get what they need. And that's how I do this work.
Yeah. There is a calm that comes over the dying individual. And is there, for listeners who may be caregivers, is there anything, I think listening is the key there, right? That's kind of been throughout our conversation is listen to your loved one. They will let you know, they'll drop cues or clues. But do you have any advice for caregivers who are helping someone at end of life?
The same thing as you're looking for joy every day as a patient that's dying. So as a caretaker, you need to look for something that is going to give you a little joy every single day. Even if it's just eating an ice cream quietly. No, truly. A bath, something simple that's going to bring you a quiet joy. That's no different for the patient. It's no different for a caretaker. If you can find help, please ask for help.
Yeah.
Even an hour break every day so you can take that bath. People generally want to help. That, if they can come and sit with someone so you can get out to the store or get some medicines, or if they could get the medicines, you need help. So call on the community, call on family, call on others to give that to you. Yeah.
And people want to. I think being really straightforward with what you need is also really important. Say, like, I wasn't able to cook. Could you bring over a meal? Are there any resources that you suggest for families who are experiencing a loved one in their final chapter?
Absolutely. The hospice volunteers have all kinds of programs, support programs. And yes, a lot of them are group, but you could do a Zoom if you didn't feel like you could leave the house. Another one that I did not mention, except very briefly today, is a lot of us have pets. They are part of the family. Anytime a caretaker can spend extra time with a pet, that's or the patient. As a caretaker, make sure if you can't take care of that family animal after your loved one dies, make sure you have plans for it. It's just there have been so many times when we've been scrambling as a hospice team to try to find a home for these pets that are family members.
Yeah.
But they haven't been taken care of. They haven't been planned for. It's hard to find a happy home sometimes.
Yeah. And you're dealing with loss of a person and then also thinking about what do we do with our furry friend? That's really helpful advice. I am so grateful, Jean, for sharing your story with us and kind of walking through all of the benefits of hospice. And I really do think it's such meaningful work. And even in preparing for this interview, I'm looking up Jean Jennings, and you were in so many people's obituaries because, the family is just so grateful for the work that you do. And, everyone has a purpose in life. You are clearly so aligned with yours and such a light in so many people's lives. So thank you for all of your work and for helping our family as well. We always think of Jean with happy faces, and you're such a good listener. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Very sweet.
Do you have a question that you would love to find the answer to, or a topic that you'd like to explore? You can now connect with us directly by clicking the Send Us a Text link in the show notes. Feel free to share a personal story. We would love to hear from you.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Giving Grief Grace. If you found the content interesting and think it could help a friend or a loved one, please share it with them. Subscribe to this podcast and get a weekly dose of positivity. And while you're at it, please leave a review. If you enjoyed the show and want to support me financially on my grief journey, I'm raising funds for Project Purple, a nonprofit whose mission is to see a world without pancreatic cancer. I'm doing this by running the New York City Marathon in November 2025, and I'll leave a link to my fundraising page in the show notes. If you've lost a loved one and are looking for support in an online community, consider joining our free private Facebook group, Giving Grief Grace. May you be kind to yourself in the week ahead and give yourself grace. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.